Hello. The story I'm going to tell you today takes place in Wisconsin, the 30th state of the United States, widely known for its cheese production. In Wisconsin, there's a city called Milwaukee, the largest city in the state and its economic hub. Once voted the best city in the Midwest from the late 1980s to early 1990s, Milwaukee became the backdrop for a chilling series of events. During that time, more than a dozen people went missing in the city, all of them gay men. The police suspected a serial killer was at work, but with no solid leads, they couldn't identify the culprit. Until one day, two patrol officers stumbled upon a discovery that would shock the nation. Let's rewind to July 22nd, 1991. It was a Monday around 11:30 p.m., and two police officers were conducting a routine patrol on the streets of Milwaukee. As they approached an apartment building on North 25th Street, a black man suddenly burst out of the building. He was shirtless, wearing a single handcuff dangling from his wrist. Panicked, he ran straight toward the officers, shouting, "Someone's trying to kill me." At first, the officers thought he might be a disturbed individual and moved to restrain him. But he quickly explained, "My name is Tracy Edwards. Tonight, I went to a bar with two friends to have some drinks. While we were there, I met a white gay man. He was generous and offered a few $100s to invite some of us back to his apartment to drink and take some risque photos. Out of the three of us, I was the only one who agreed to his deal, so I followed him to his place in that building. When I walked in, I noticed a faint foul smell. There were a few bottles of hydrochloric acid scattered on the living room floor, and the TV was playing a horror movie, The Exorcist. It fell off, so I asked him about the acid. He said it was for cleaning dirt off the floor. After some small talk, he handcuffed me. I knew some clients had weird kinks, so I didn't resist much and asked why he did it. He said it was a personal preference and hoped I'd go along with it. Then we went into the bedroom. The stench, there was even worse. In the corner, there was a blue plastic barrel. I guess that's where the smell was coming from. Though I hated the odor, I cooperated and lay on the bed for the photos. Suddenly, he pulled out a knife, threatened me, and told me to strip. I sensed something was seriously wrong, but with my hands cuffed, escaping seemed impossible. As I started undressing, I suggested he uncuff me, showing I was willing to cooperate. He let his guard down, put the knife aside, and paced around the room, humming a tune. Once I was undressed, he came closer, pressed his head against my chest, and calmly said, "I'm going to eat your heart." That terrified me. I'd guessed he might be a little twisted, but not to this extent. Pretending to smile and laugh it off, I said we were friends while desperately thinking of a way out. Then I noticed the apartment door wasn't locked. It was my chance. I suggested we go to the living room for a few drinks. Later, I excused myself to the bathroom and waited for him to drop his guard. When I came out and he wasn't paying attention, I punched him hard in the face, bolted out the door, and ran as fast as I could. Luckily, I spotted you two officers here. After hearing Tracy's story, the officers followed him back to the apartment building and up to apartment 213 on the second floor. They knocked, and a white man opened the door. When questioned, he admitted he'd handcuffed Tracy, but said the key was on a nightstand by the bed. Since Tracy had mentioned being threatened with a knife by a white man, the officers proceeded cautiously into the apartment to investigate. Let's take a look at the layout. There's the front door, leading into the living room with a kitchen area nearby, a sofa, and a TV. Then there's a bathroom and, finally, a bedroom. As the officers entered the bedroom, they noticed an open drawer next to the bed. Peering inside, they saw Polaroid photos of dismembered human bodies. Convinced the images were real, they immediately drew their guns, subdued the man, and called for backup. After securing him, they continued searching. When they opened the refrigerator in the living room, they found a freshly severed head of a black man, along with other body parts. Seeing his crimes exposed, the man quickly said, "I did all of this. I deserve to die." Soon, backup arrived, and the police sealed off the apartment, launching an official investigation. Inside, they found cooked human flesh on the kitchen counter. Beyond the head, the fridge contained two hearts and part of an arm. Other body parts were wrapped in plastic bags. In total, they discovered 11 skulls, 4 in the living room, 7 in the bedroom. Some were bleached, others painted. In the bedroom, a blue plastic barrel held acidic liquid and dismembered parts from 3 different men. They also found 2 complete skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 male genitalia, and more. Additionally, 74 photos documented the dismemberment process of various victims. The scene was so gruesome it defied description. A forensic worker later said it felt more like a surgical museum than a crime scene. The man's identity was soon revealed. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, born May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His father, Lionel Herbert Dahmer, was a chemist with a PhD, and his mother, Joyce Annette, was a homemaker. After Jeffrey's birth, Joyce suffered from postpartum depression, spending most of her days in bed. Lionel, still finishing his studies, was rarely home. Neither parent had much time for Jeffrey. As a young child, he was well-behaved and sensible. But as he grew, his mother's condition worsened, even leading to suicidal thoughts. Whenever his father was home, the couple argued fiercely, and Jeffrey often witnessed their bitter fights. In 1964, at age 4, Jeffrey underwent surgery for a double hernia, after which he became withdrawn and avoided socializing. Once, he watched his father experiment with animal bones at home, sparking a fascination in him. He began collecting animal bones in the woods and catching live creatures, pressing their bodies to locate their bones, thrilled by the cracking sounds. In October 1966, when Jeffrey was 6, the family moved to Doylestown, Ohio. There, Joyce gave birth to a second son, David, a name Jeffrey chose for his brother. That same year, Lionel found work at a research institute in Ohio. Over the next 2 years, the family moved several times before settling in Bath Township, Summit County, Ohio, in a quiet 2-story house. At 8, Jeffrey roamed the area and found an abandoned wooden shack, turning it into his secret hideout. He collected insects and small animals, storing them in jars there. 2 years later, in 1970, at age 10, during a family gathering, he saw leftover chicken bones on the table and curiously asked his father what would happen if they were soaked in bleach. Lionel, pleased by his son's interest, taught him how to safely bleach and preserve bones. Jeffrey began gathering roadkill or forest animals, bringing them to his shack to dissect and preserve their skeletons. In one reckless moment, he killed a dog, severed its head, impaled it on a stick in the ground, and nailed the body to a tree. He admired his work and even excitedly showed it to friends, claiming he'd stumbled upon it. That year, Joyce's mental health deteriorated further. She attempted suicide with pills multiple times, but failed. Lionel was often absent due to work, and Jeffrey rarely felt parental love, though he seemed accustomed to it. By 1974, at 14, Jeffrey entered high school, a rebellious teen neglected by his parents. He grew cynical and isolated, turning to alcohol for solace. He hid liquor in his clothes at school. Socially awkward with few friends, he craved attention. Since childhood, he'd acted out, mimicking an epileptic seizure or bleating like a sheep to draw notice. His antics made him a class clown, but he didn't care as long as he was seen. He continued such pranks, excelling only in biology, obsessed with dissecting animals, but showing little interest in other subjects. During puberty, Jeffrey realized he was attracted to men, not women. He had a few boyfriends in school, but the relationships quickly fizzled. He began fantasizing about a partner who'd fully submit to him and never leave. Once he saw a muscular man jogging and felt an urge to be with him. Days later, he hid in bushes with a baseball bat, planning to attack the man, but the jogger never appeared, his first attempted crime. In 1977, nearing high school graduation, his grades were poor, risking his diploma. Worried, his parents hired a tutor, but their fights escalated, sometimes turning physical. By 1978, their marriage ended. Jeffrey, now 18 and graduating, invited his mother to the ceremony, but she declined, saying his father's presence was enough. Neither parent cared much for him, though they fought over custody of David. Joyce won, taking David back to Wisconsin, while Jeffrey stayed with his father. The string of painful events left Jeffrey reeling. Feeling unloved compared to his brother, he sank deeper into alcoholism. In June 1978, 3 weeks after graduating, he was driving when he spotted a shirtless man walking. Intrigued, he pulled over and asked if the man needed a ride. The man, Stephen Hicks, happily accepted, saying he was headed to a concert in Lockwood Corners. Jeffrey suggested it was early and invited Stephen to his house for drinks, promising to drive him to the concert later. Stephen agreed. At Jeffrey's home, they drank and chatted. Stephen talked about beautiful women, but Jeffrey, uninterested, fixated on him. Knowing a romantic advance would be rejected, he grew frustrated. After hours of talking, Stephen prepared to leave for the concert, but Jeffrey didn't want him to go. When Stephen wasn't looking, Jeffrey grabbed a 10-pound dumbbell and struck him twice on the head, knocking him unconscious. He then crushed Stephen's chest with the dumbbell, stripped him, and molested the body. The next day, Jeffrey dissected the corpse in his basement and buried it in the backyard. Weeks later, worried about kids playing nearby, he dug it up, dissolved the flesh in acid, pulverized the bones with a hammer, and scattered them in the woods. A month later, in July 1978, his father returned home, found Jeffrey drinking all day, and used connections to enroll him at Ohio State University, a top public school in the Great Lakes region. There, Jeffrey showed no interest in studies, continuing his heavy drinking. His father once visited and found his dorm room littered with liquor bottles, deeply disappointed. Jeffrey dropped out after 3 months. In January 1979, at 19, he enlisted in the U.S. Army as a medic at his father's urging. His alcoholism and other issues led to an early discharge. Fearing his father's wrath, he didn't return home. On March 24, 1981, Jeffrey moved to Miami, Florida, staying in a motel and working at a beachside fast food shop. Outside work, he drank in his room. 6 months later, in September 1981, his father learned of his discharge and called, demanding he return to Ohio. Back home with his father and stepmother, Jeffrey was arrested 2 weeks later for public intoxication and disorderly conduct, jailed for 10 days. His father made him do all the housework and find a job to keep him busy and curb his drinking, but it didn't help. 3 months later, in December 1981, his father, noting Jeffrey's close bond with his grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, sent him to live with her in Milwaukee. She'd always had a good relationship with him as a child. His father asked her to encourage Jeffrey to find steady work and quit drinking. With little to do, Jeffrey helped her around the house and occasionally joined her at church. In 1982, he landed a job as a phlebotomist at a local plasma center. But on August 7, 1982, he was convicted of exposing himself to women and children, fined $50, and fired. For the next 2 years, he lived off his grandmother's charity. In January 1985, at 25, he got a job as a bartender. One day, while at the public library, a man slipped him a note asking if he wanted a gay partner. Jeffrey didn't respond, but it reignited a long-suppressed desire. From then on, he stopped restraining himself, frequenting gay bars and bathhouses. He once stole a male mannequin from a store, hiding it in his closet until his grandmother found it and made him discard it. At night, he brought men home from bars. During sex, he hated their movements, wanting total control. He began drugging their drinks with sleeping pills or sedatives, waiting until they passed out to act freely. But his twisted thoughts grew darker. Once, he read about an 18-year-old's death in the paper, located the grave, and planned to dig up the body for pleasure. Late at night, he went to the cemetery with a shovel, but gave up when the ground proved too hard. On September 8, 1985, he was convicted again for public exposure, sentenced to a year of probation. In November 1987, at 27, he met Stephen Twomey in a bar, a man from Michigan, his second victim. Jeffrey lured him to a hotel, spiked his drink, and waited for him to pass out before having sex. The next morning, he awoke to find Stephen dead beside him, bruised and bleeding from the mouth, no longer breathing. He hadn't meant to kill him, but with no way back, he bought a large suitcase, stuffed the body inside, and took it to his grandmother's house to hide. A week later, his deranged impulses took over. He dismembered Stephen in the basement, chopping the body into pieces, bagging them and smashing the bones with a hammer, a 2-hour process. He discarded everything except the head, which he boiled in an industrial alkaline cleaner and bleached 2 weeks later, keeping the skull. Finding it brittle and prone to breaking, he crushed and trashed it. 2 months later, on January 16, 1988, he met James Dockstader, his third victim, in a bar, offering $50 for photos at home. Using the same method, drink, strangulation, he disposed of the body, preserving and bleaching the skull for display. Still unsatisfied, he repeated the pattern, targeting gay men from bars, perfecting his skull preservation. Some bleached, others painted vibrantly. In April 1988, at 28, he lured another man home. As he prepared to kill, a noise alerted his grandmother, who called out, "Is that you, Jeffrey?" Fearing discovery, he abandoned the plan and secretly dumped the man outside a hospital at midnight. 5 months later, his drinking and late-night guests caused a persistent stench in his room, infuriating his grandmother, who evicted him. He rented an apartment on North 24th Street in Milwaukee. In September 1988, 8 months after moving in, he was charged with drugging and molesting a 13-year-old boy. A psychological evaluation diagnosed him with schizoid personality disorder, impulsive, distrustful, and lacking confidence. In January 1989, his trial began, resulting in a second-degree sexual assault conviction. Sentencing was delayed until May 1989, with him detained in the meantime. In March 1989, he was granted a 10-day release for Easter. 5 days later, on March 25, 1989, he killed Anthony Sears, a 24-year-old mixed-race model, his fifth victim. With his grandmother away, he dragged the body from the basement to the bathtub, dismembered it, and stored parts in jars inside a wooden box. On May 23, 1989, he was sentenced to 5 years probation, initially facing a year in prison, but released after 2 months for good behavior, returning to his grandmother's. On May 14, 1990, at 30, she evicted him again, along with his grisly collection. He moved to apartment 213 on North 25th Street in Milwaukee, the site from the story start. Free from oversight, he killed 12 more times undetected over 2 years. He lured men with promises of cash for nude photos, satisfying his urges before dismembering them, keeping skulls as trophies, some even exploding when he tried drying them in a microwave. Later, he stopped strangling, instead drilling holes into victims' heads and injecting acid or boiling water, hoping to create living zombies, conscious but powerless, fully under his control. On May 26, 1991, he invited Konarak sent to some phone, a 14-year-old immigrant, his 13th victim, to pose for photos. After drugging Konarak's drink, he drilled a hole in his head and injected acid, leaving the boy in the bedroom with another victim's 3-day-old corpse. Jeffrey stepped out to a bar. Returning early the next morning, he found Konarak, naked, talking to 3 women downstairs. He threw an arm around the boy, claiming, "He's my boyfriend. I'll take him now." Skeptical, the women called police. Jeffrey calmly told the arriving officers Konarak was his 19-year-old boyfriend, drunk from a night out. The women pointed out blood on Konarak and doubted he was intoxicated, but the police dismissed them. Medics arrived, suggesting hospital care, but the officers overruled them. Bringing Konarak back to the apartment, they noticed a strange smell and briefly searched but found nothing incriminating. Jeffrey showed them intimate photos of him and Konarak from that afternoon, convincing them. After they left, furious at the escape attempt, he injected more acid, killing Konarak. The next day, he took off work to dismember the body, keeping the heart and liver in the fridge to eat later. Over 2 years there, neighbors often complained of a foul stench and occasional chainsaw noises, but he'd deflect with excuses. Until his final discovery, he killed 17 people, aged 14 to 36, all black, Asian, or Hispanic immigrants. At the time, racial tensions in the U.S. were high, and Milwaukee, an industrial city with many foreign workers, may have left his targets overlooked, fueling local outrage. The three officers who returned counteract to him likely harbored racial bias, trusting the white Jeffrey over the boy. Charged with 17 counts of first-degree murder, he pleaded guilty to 16. After the case, racial conflicts flared, and Jeffrey became a hated figure. On January 13, 1992, his trial began, with heavy security to prevent riots. Surprisingly, he recanted his confession, pleading not guilty, claiming mental instability during his initial admission. His defense argued he suffered from a mental disorder, unable to control his actions. Prosecutors countered he was fully rational, killing and keeping bodies for pleasure and control, terrorizing Milwaukee. After a 4-month trial, on May 1st, 1992, the jury unanimously convicted him. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer received 16 life sentences plus 941 years. The charge for Stephen Twomey, his second victim, was dropped. He claimed no memory of that killing, saying only, "When I woke up, he had a broken rib cage and was bruised. Apparently, I'd beaten him to death with my fists." Sentenced, he was sent to Columbia Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison in Wisconsin housing over 800 male inmates. Initially in solitary, he later joined the general population, working prison jobs. He requested a Bible, reading it daily and confessing his sins. In an interview, asked why 9 years elapsed between his first, 1978, and second murders, he said an inner beast drove him, one he couldn't escape. Asked why he kept skulls, he revealed plans for an altar, a table with candles at each end, 10 heads in the center, intended for completion within 6 months had he not been caught. Asked who it honored, he said, "Me. It's where I'd meditate and gain power." On November 28th, 1994, Jeffrey and 2 inmates cleaned a bathroom. After 20 minutes with no sign of them, guards checked and found Jeffrey and another prisoner beaten unconscious on the floor, heads bashed in. Rushed to the hospital, Jeffrey died an hour later despite resuscitation efforts. The other died 2 days later. The attacker, Christopher Scarver, a schizophrenic inmate, claimed God ordered him to deliver justice. Hiding a metal bar in his clothes, he struck when they were off guard. Jeffrey didn't resist or make a sound. A man whose heinous crimes horrified the world. He once said in an interview, "I don't know if God or the devil exists, but I think both were influencing me." That's the end of today's story. From a criminal psychology perspective, Jeffrey Dahmer's case reveals a deeply disturbed mind shaped by neglect, isolation, and unchecked impulses. His early fascination with death and control, worsened by a traumatic childhood and substance abuse, evolved into a compulsive need to dominate others, culminating in his gruesome acts. His ability to evade detection for years highlights both his cunning and society's failures. Racial bias and inadequate policing allowed his spree to continue. Dahmer remains a stark study in how psychological wounds, left untreated, can spiral into unimaginable evil. See you in the next story. Goodbye.